Today I just want to talk about how do you know if the food you're feeding is actually quality dog food. Dog food. So on dog food cans, kibble, pre-made, homemade dog, just any kind of dog food, maybe not homemade because there's no label with that, but any kind of dog food you're purchasing that has a label. I think there was a really big argument and a really big splash in the media a couple years ago that when you read labels, you're supposed to look for foods that don't say byproduct, or there should be a whole meat ingredient listed first because that means that's the most prominent ingredient, or that when you look at the ingredients list, there shouldn't be anything you don't recognize. And that was all good advice, and that's a conversation for another day. But regardless of what the ingredients are and what they say, you can have an amazing looking ingredient list and some really bad quality dog food. Because what it comes down to is the nutrients, and what's important is the nutrient values that you're putting into your dog food. So how much protein is your dog actually consuming, how much vitamins, which vitamins and minerals. That's what I want to talk to you about today, to make sure, regardless of the ingredient list, so like I said, even if you do home cook, regardless of the ingredient list, how much and what should you actually have in there, because that's what's important for your dog. So one easy way to check if your dog food is up to par, there is a company that is a non-profit, I believe. There's a company called the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and yes, I read that off of paper. The short version of that is it's AAFCO, which I just say AAFCO. So AAFCO is a company that actually formulates and decides what the appropriate values should be in dog food. And this is really important to know because AAFCO is nonprofit, which means it's not regulatory in any way. It's not part of the government. It's not like an official standard, which means even though this company may set guidelines, dog food companies don't have to follow it. They have to follow what the FDA determines, because that is a government company, the Food and Drug Administration, but they don't have to follow AAFCO guidelines. And this is the problem, because even though the FDA is kind of doing quality control, the FDA doesn't really look into nutrient requirements. They're more concerned with the safety of the food, that it's being handled properly, not having any like pathogens and diseases, no like outbreaks of any kind. So that's what the FDA is for, which means there's no company that's really holding any of these dog foods accountable. AAFCO really is the only one that's actually like pursuing holding these companies accountable, and they actually are the only ones that have a up-to-date nutrient guidelines. There was a different company called NCR. They had one too, and it's actually very similar to AAFCO, so if you follow NCR, that's fine. But NCR, again, cannot hold any foods accountable, as far as I know, because I never see that on any label. And also they're a little bit outdated, more so than AAFCO. So AAFCO is the one I use and follow. And even though, like I said, it's not a government company, it's still a functional company. It's still putting out proper research and definitions for what dogs should have in their food. You might be a little confused right now because I'm just blah 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 about all this AAFCO stuff and guidelines and like throwing out words. Simple terms, here's what it comes down to. There is nobody holding your dog food accountable for the amount of each ingredient it needs to have. So what it comes down to is you are the one that now needs to hold them accountable. You need to do the good. So how do you do this? Well, there are food companies out there that do follow AAFCO guidelines because they are also aware that dogs need certain nutritional requirements. And so if you look at dog food cans, they should say meets AAFCO guidelines, or follows AAFCO standards, or something like that, or meets AAFCO nutrient profiles. I don't want to tell you to choose a certain brand, and I don't want to throw brands out there. That's up for you to decide, but all I can say is as long as it says follows AAFCO standards, that's a good brand. I will mentioning not all dog food brands will label it, but they could be following these standards. So if you really are in love with your brand and you just ran to the pantry and you realized it doesn't say AAFCO on it and now you're panicking, you can contact your brand and just say, would you mind sending a nutrient profile, or do you follow AAFCO standards? And they should be able to respond to you with that. So you just contact the company. I've contacted dog food companies before to ask for nutrient profiles, which is basically the not an ingredients list, the little label that tells you like calories, proteins, fats. I've asked for that before. So it's easy to do, and I've never had anyone deny me of that. So it's something I would do if you don't know or you're not sure, or it doesn't say AAFCO on the can. If it says AAFCO on your dog food, you're done deal. You're good. There's nothing else I can do for you. Your dog food is perfectly fine. Now, if your dog food does not say AAFCO guidelines and you're wondering if it still meets it, or you home cook and you want to know if you're kind of within those guidelines, I will talk about the home cooking more later. But for today, these are the guidelines set out by AAFCO in a simplified form. And what they do is they break it into the 3 macromolecules and the 2 non-energy nutrients, which are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, aka those are also called fats. So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, minerals, and vitamins. That's the list of 5 that AAFCO sets guidelines for. Protein, because dogs are evolutionary meat eaters, protein is always the first and foremost ingredient that you should be looking for. And if you look at the can and it doesn't say AAFCO, but you want to know if it meets the AAFCO minimum, protein, the minimum for AAFCO standards is 18% of the dog food should be a protein. So 18% of that dog food should be protein, but in general, 18% is the minimum. And if you look at your dog food can and it does not say 18% protein, you're not meeting the standards right there, right now. That's one to get rid of, and you should go find a dog food can that has 18% protein at least, even if it does not say AAFCO guidelines. Secondly, the fats. So fats are also called lipids. So if you look on the can, it says lipids, that's your fat. Your fats should make up 5% of the diet. For that, it's a very tiny amount, but fats are very calorie heavy. They can cause diarrhea if you have too much of it in the diet. So fats should only be about 5 to 10% of the diet, but 5% is the minimum. So again, look at the back of that can or the kibble, and if it does not say 5% fats, not good enough. The next one, I'm gonna skip carbs for a second. The next one is vitamins and minerals. So vitamins and minerals, it's kind of hard to get a percentage because AAFCO, some are percentage and the others, they just give an amount, like this amount has to just be in there regardless of the percent of the food it makes up. You just need this amount. But in general, 5% also, about 5% of the diet, maybe a little more, 5 to 10% should be vitamins and minerals. But like I said, it's kind of hard to measure that because regardless of the percentage it makes up, you need like a certain amount of copper in the diet or a certain amount of magnesium, like that. That's the vitamins and minerals. And most dog food labels, I haven't seen that listed. A lot of them don't say the amount of vitamins and minerals that are in there. So if the proteins and the fats are enough, and now you want to know about the vitamins and minerals, maybe just contact the company, like I said, and ask for a breakdown, and you can see if it meets the standards. And then lastly, with carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are things like starches, grains, and breads, and there's no guideline for that, which is why dog foods can go grain-free, because there's no minimum amount of grains that are needed. And so that one's okay. There's 2 different ways to see this. There's grain-free people and whole grain people. I'm a whole grain person. I see the value of grains in a diet. So I'm just letting you know there is no minimum for carbohydrates. So if you don't feed that, that's okay because you're meeting standards. But you could still meet a lot of like vitamins and minerals through grain carbohydrate. And that's pretty much it. I feel like I talked myself into a circle. So there's 2 things that I will link in the description that I want you to look for yourself that are going to be really, really helpful to you. The first is go to the AAFCO website. On the website, there is a consumer tab, and if you click that tab, there's a whole lot of information for you as a buyer, as a consumer, that you can look at. I will also link below the FDA recall list for pet foods, and you could see if the dog food has been on there, and it's ordered by newest to oldest. It lists the company, which type of food it was, and what they went wrong with. Sometimes it's like a minor slip up, like the packaging was not to standard, but other times you'll see it'll say like they had a salmonella outbreak, and that's something more important to consider. But if you have any questions, put it in the comments, please, please, please. Like I said, it's hard to talk about this stuff in simple terms without going too deep. Anyway, leave a comment if you need help, and subscribe. It really does help. And I post new videos every Friday, which means I will see you next week. Bye!